The drawing room of Greystone Manor was the kind of elegant that made Eleanor Hartwell acutely aware of every crease in her travelling dress. Cream silk wallpaper caught the afternoon light, and the furniture looked as though it had never been sat upon by anyone lacking a title. She smoothed her skirts and reminded herself that she'd been in grander homes than this. The Duchess of Marlborough had served her tea in Blenheim Palace just last month, praising Eleanor's work in securing her niece's engagement to a respectable earl. But that had been before she'd received the summons from the Dowager Duchess of Greystone. "Miss Hartwell." The voice came from the doorway, and Eleanor turned to find a woman in her late 50s sweeping into the room with the kind of authority that made curtsying feel less like protocol and more like survival instinct. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Your Grace." Eleanor rose, dipping into a perfect curtsy. "It's an honor." The Dowager Duchess settled into a chair and gestured for Eleanor to sit. "I'll be direct. My son needs a wife. He's been putting it off for 5 years, using every excuse imaginable. I've invited suitable young ladies to dinner. I've arranged chance encounters at the opera. Nothing works." She paused, her sharp eyes assessing Eleanor with the precision of a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws. "Your mother had a gift for seeing what others couldn't. She arranged 17 marriages before she retired, and every one of them has lasted. I'm told you've inherited her talent." Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though pride warmed her chest. "I've arranged 9 successful matches in the past year, Your Grace. All of them have resulted in happy unions. Then you'll have no trouble with my son." There was something in the Dowager's tone, a challenge or perhaps a warning that made Eleanor hesitate. "May I ask why His Grace hasn't found someone on his own? Surely a man of his position has no shortage of interested parties." "That's precisely the problem." The Dowager's mouth thinned. "Alexander believes every woman who approaches him sees only the title. He's convinced himself that genuine affection is impossible in his position. He's charming, intelligent, and utterly closed off to the possibility of love." She leaned forward. "I need you to prove him wrong." Eleanor felt the familiar thrill of a challenge accepted. This was why she loved her work. Not the money, though that certainly helped, but the satisfaction of seeing 2 people discover they were meant to find each other. "I'll need time with him, to understand his true preferences, beyond what he claims to want." "You'll have it. He's agreed to meet you this afternoon." The Dowager stood, smoothing her skirts. "Though I should warn you, he thinks this entire enterprise is ridiculous. He's only indulging me to avoid further arguments." Perfect, Eleanor thought. Men who believed themselves immune to matchmaking were often the most rewarding clients. They were so busy protecting themselves that they never saw the right match coming until it was too late. "Then I'll simply have to change his mind," Eleanor said. The gardens of Greystone Manor stretched toward the horizon in manicured perfection, and Eleanor found the Duke of Greystone standing near a fountain, his back to the house. He was taller than she'd expected, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and shoulders that suggested he spent more time riding than sitting behind a desk. When he turned at the sound of her approach, she saw a face that was handsome in the classical sense. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes the color of storm clouds. But it was the sardonic twist of his mouth that caught her attention. "Miss Hartwell, I presume." His voice was smooth, cultured, with an undercurrent of amusement that suggested he found this entire situation entertaining. "My mother's latest weapon in her campaign to see me married." "Your Grace." Eleanor curtsied, keeping her tone professional. "I prefer to think of myself as a facilitator rather than a weapon." "How diplomatic!" He gestured toward a stone bench beneath a willow tree. "Shall we sit? I'm told you need to understand my preferences before you can begin parading suitable candidates before me." Eleanor settled onto the bench, opening the small notebook she'd brought. "I don't parade candidates, Your Grace. I introduce compatible individuals and allow them to discover whether they suit each other." "And how exactly do you determine compatibility?" He sat beside her, close enough that she caught the scent of sandalwood and horse and something crisp that might have been the outdoors. "Do you consult the stars? Read tea leaves?" "I observe." Eleanor met his eyes, refusing to be rattled by the mockery in his tone. "I watch how people interact, what makes them light up, what they avoid discussing. I learn what they truly value versus what they claim to want, and then I make introductions. How terribly scientific. He stretched his legs out, crossing them at the ankle, with the casual grace of a man who'd never had to worry about taking up space. And what if I told you I don't want to be matched? Then I'd say you're lying, Your Grace. The words hung in the air between them. His eyebrows rose, and for a moment, Eleanor wondered if she'd miscalculated. But then he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from merely handsome to dangerously attractive. "Bold," he said. "I see why my mother hired you. Very well, Miss Hartwell. What do you need to know about my preferences?" "Everything." Eleanor pulled out a pencil. "Let's start with what you value in a companion." For the next hour, they talked. Or rather, Eleanor asked questions, and the Duke provided answers that were clearly designed to be unhelpful. He claimed to value beauty, which meant nothing, intelligence, which could mean anything, grace, poise, breeding, all the standard requirements that told her exactly nothing about what would actually make him happy. But Eleanor had learned her trade from the best. She watched him while he spoke, noting what made him pause, what made his expression shift, what made his gaze drift toward the house. And slowly, beneath the polished deflections, she began to see the outline of something real. He valued honesty even when it was inconvenient. He'd smiled when she'd called him a liar. He respected directness, though he clearly wasn't accustomed to receiving it. And there was something in the way he spoke about his mother, exasperated but affectionate, that suggested he valued loyalty above all else. "Thank you, Your Grace," Eleanor said finally, closing her notebook. "I believe I have enough to begin." "That's it?" He looked almost disappointed. "No declarations about finding me the perfect woman? No promises of true love?" "I don't make promises I can't keep." Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirts. "But I will find you someone compatible. Whether you choose to pursue that compatibility is entirely up to you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Hartwell?" "Yes?" "You're not what I expected." Eleanor glanced back over her shoulder. "Good. That means I have a chance of surprising you." That evening, Eleanor sat in the small room the Dowager Duchess had provided for her stay and reviewed her notes. The Duke of Greystone was more complicated than she'd anticipated. He wore his skepticism like armor, but beneath it she'd sensed something else, a loneliness he probably didn't even acknowledge to himself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." A maid entered, carrying a tea tray. "The Dowager Duchess thought you might need refreshment, miss." "How thoughtful." Eleanor accepted the tea gratefully. "Tell me, how long have you worked here?" 3 years, miss." "And the Duke? What's he like as a master?" The maid's face brightened. "Oh, His Grace is wonderful, miss. Fair, generous. He remembers all our names, asks after our families. My sister took ill last winter, and he paid for the physician himself." She set down the tray, then hesitated. "If you don't mind me saying, miss, he deserves someone good. Someone who sees him, not just the title." After the maid left, Eleanor stared at her notebook. Someone who sees him, that was the key, wasn't it? The Duke believed himself invisible beneath the weight of his position. Her job was to find someone who could see past that. But first, she needed to prove to him that such a person existed. The next morning, Eleanor presented her first candidate over breakfast. A strategic error, she realized the moment the Duke walked into the dining room and saw her sitting across from Lady Catherine Ashworth. "Your Grace." Lady Catherine smiled, the kind of practiced expression that came from years of social training. She was lovely, golden hair, blue eyes, impeccable posture, and exactly the sort of woman the Duke would expect Eleanor to choose, which was precisely why Eleanor had chosen her. The Duke's gaze flicked to Eleanor, something sharp and accusatory in his expression, before he arranged his features into polite interest. "Lady Catherine, what a pleasant surprise. Miss Hartwell was kind enough to invite me," Lady Catherine said, her voice carefully modulated to project both warmth and propriety. "She thought we might enjoy becoming better acquainted." The breakfast proceeded with excruciating correctness. Lady Catherine spoke of her family's estate in Kent, her recent visit to Paris, her opinions on the latest agricultural reforms. She said all the right things, demonstrated all the right accomplishments, and Eleanor watched the Duke grow more distant with every passing minute. When Lady Catherine finally departed, with promises to meet again soon, the Duke turned to Eleanor with barely contained irritation. "That was your idea of compatibility. That was my idea of establishing a baseline," Eleanor said calmly, making notes in her book. "Now I know what doesn't work. You dragged a perfectly nice young woman here just to prove a point. I invited a perfectly nice young woman here because she seemed suitable on paper. Now we both know she isn't suitable in practice." Eleanor set down her pencil and met his eyes. "You were polite, appropriate, and completely uninterested, which tells me that conventional beauty and proper breeding aren't enough. I could have told you that. You could have claimed that. Now I've observed it." She closed her notebook. "The next candidate will be different. There's going to be a next one?" "Your Grace, there's going to be several, unless you'd prefer I tell your mother I failed on the first attempt." His jaw tightened, and for a moment Eleanor thought he might actually dismiss her. But then his expression shifted into something that might have been reluctant respect. "You're more stubborn than I anticipated." "I prefer determined," Eleanor said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have correspondences to write." The next candidate arrived 3 days later. Miss Beatrice Thornton was everything Lady Catherine wasn't. Dark-haired, quick-witted, with a tendency to speak before thinking that Eleanor suspected the Duke might actually appreciate. She'd arranged for them to meet during a ride through the estate, and she'd positioned herself at a discreet distance to observe. It started better than the breakfast with Lady Catherine. Miss Thornton asked intelligent questions about the land management, laughed at something the Duke said, and generally seemed at ease in his company. Eleanor made notes, watching the way he relaxed into genuine conversation. But then Miss Thornton's horse shied at a rabbit, and in the commotion that followed, the Duke steadying her mount, Miss Thornton's breathless thanks, Eleanor saw the moment his expression shuttered. It was subtle, a barely perceptible withdrawal, but she recognized it immediately. He doesn't trust it, she thought. He thinks she's performing. The ride concluded without incident, but Eleanor knew before Miss Thornton departed that this match wouldn't work either. The Duke had been charming, attentive, and utterly unconvinced of the young woman's sincerity. That evening, she found him in the music room, a space she'd been told he rarely used. He was standing by the pianoforte, one hand resting on the polished wood, staring at the keys without playing. "Another failure," he said without looking up. "My mother will be delighted." Eleanor closed the door behind her. Miss Thornton was perfectly suitable. Then why did you watch me like a hawk the entire ride, waiting for me to find her wanting? He finally looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her chest tighten. "I know what you're doing, Miss Hartwell. You're testing me, proving that I'm too particular, too damaged, too convinced of my own isolation to accept anyone. That's not, isn't it?" He moved toward her, and Eleanor found herself backing against the door. He stopped a respectful distance away, but his presence filled the room. "You think I don't see it? Every introduction, every carefully arranged encounter, you're trying to prove I'm wrong about love, that I can trust someone again." Eleanor's breath caught. "Your Grace, 5 years ago I was engaged to be married." His voice was flat, controlled. "Lady Helena Wexford. Beautiful, accomplished, from an excellent family. I was 27 and stupid enough to believe she loved me for myself." He turned away, staring out the window at the darkening gardens. "I found her in the rose garden with Viscount Ramsay. They were kissing. She was crying, telling him she couldn't bear to marry me but had no choice. Her family needed the alliance." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. She apologized afterward, begged my forgiveness. She'd been genuine about that, I think, genuinely sorry for being caught. He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "So yes, Miss Hartwell, I'm convinced that every woman who approaches me sees only the title, because the one time I thought otherwise, I was proven spectacularly wrong." Eleanor stood there, her professional detachment crumbling. This was the real assignment, she realized, not finding him a wife but helping him believe he deserved to be chosen for himself. "Lady Helena was a fool," she said quietly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Is that your professional opinion?" "It's my personal one." Eleanor moved closer, closing the distance he'd left between them. "She had your loyalty, your trust, your heart, and she threw them away because she couldn't see past her own circumstances to what she actually had. That's not a reflection on you, Your Grace, it's a reflection on her. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then he reached out, his fingers hovering near her hand, as though he wanted to touch her, but didn't dare. You're very good at this, he said softly. At matchmaking. At making people feel seen. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears. She should step back, should maintain professional distance, should remember why she was here. Instead, she said, "Perhaps that's because I actually am seeing you." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then a clock chimed somewhere in the house, breaking the spell. Eleanor stepped back, smoothing her skirts with hands that weren't quite steady. "I should review tomorrow's schedule," she said. "Good evening, Your Grace." She fled before he could respond, her heart racing with something that definitely wasn't professional detachment. Eleanor spent the next morning in the breakfast room, determinedly not thinking about the previous evening. She'd been hired to find the Duke a wife, not to develop entirely inappropriate feelings for him herself. The solution was simple. She needed to work faster, introduce him to more candidates, prove that the right woman existed. The problem was that every candidate she considered seemed wrong, too vapid, too calculating, too interested in his title, too beautiful, which would make him suspicious, not beautiful enough, which would make people question his choice, too quiet, too loud, too everything, and not enough anything. "You look troubled." Eleanor jumped, sending her teacup rattling in its saucer. The Duke stood in the doorway, dressed for riding and looking far too alert for someone who'd been as emotionally raw as he'd been the previous night. "Just reviewing my notes," she said, closing her notebook quickly. He crossed the room and sat across from her without invitation. "You know, most matchmakers would have given up by now, declared me impossible and moved on to easier clients. I don't give up easily. I've noticed." He helped himself to coffee, adding sugar with the kind of casual domesticity that shouldn't have been charming, but somehow was. "What are you really doing here, Miss Hartwell?" "I'm attempting to find you a suitable wife." "No." He set down the sugar spoon with deliberate care. "You're attempting to prove something. To me, or possibly to yourself. I haven't quite determined which." Eleanor met his eyes, refusing to look away. "Perhaps I'm attempting to prove that connection is possible, even when someone has convinced themselves otherwise. And what if I'm right? What if every woman does only see the title? Then you haven't met the right woman yet. Or," he said quietly, "I've been looking in the wrong places." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor's throat went dry. "Your Grace, Alexander." He leaned forward. "When we're alone, call me Alexander. That would be inappropriate. So was your comment about Lady Helena being a fool. So was the way you looked at me in the music room last night." His gaze held hers, unflinching. "Stop pretending you don't feel this, Eleanor." Her name in his mouth was dangerous. It stripped away titles and roles and reminded her that beneath the matchmaker and the Duke, they were simply a man and a woman in a sun-filled room, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. "I feel nothing beyond professional interest," she lied. "Liar." The word was gentle, almost affectionate, and it broke something inside her. "This can't happen, you know it can't." "Why not?" "Because I was hired to find you someone else. Because my reputation depends on successfully completing that task. Because—" She stopped, unable to articulate the deepest reason. Because if she let herself want him, she'd have to confront everything she'd been avoiding about her own future. "Because you're afraid," he finished for her. Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I should go, I need to—" "Eleanor!" She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, but didn't turn around. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you're extraordinary, not as a matchmaker, as yourself." Eleanor fled before she could do something catastrophic like believe him. That afternoon, Lord Thorne arrived unannounced, a tall, broad man with laugh lines around his eyes and the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. Eleanor was reviewing correspondence in the drawing room when he was announced, and she looked up to find him studying her with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the infamous matchmaker," he said, settling into a chair without waiting for invitation. Alexander's told me about you. Has he? Eleanor kept her tone neutral. And you are? Lord Thorn, Alexander's oldest friend and occasional voice of reason, though he rarely listens to the latter. He smiled, and Eleanor found herself warming to him despite her wariness. I'm here to assess whether you're genuinely trying to help him or simply collecting your fee regardless of outcome. I don't get paid unless the marriage actually occurs, Eleanor said coolly. So I assure you, my motivations are quite practical. Interesting. Thorn leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. Then why have you presented him with women he was bound to reject? Eleanor's fingers tightened on her pencil. I presented him with suitable candidates based on his stated preferences. His stated preferences or what you thought he needed? Thorn's expression was knowing. Don't misunderstand. I think you're doing exactly the right thing. Alexander has been hiding behind his title and his old hurt for years. He needs someone to challenge him, push him, refuse to accept his carefully constructed walls. With respect, Lord Thorn, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm implying that you've done something in 3 weeks that no one else has managed in 5 years. You've made him interested again, not in marriage necessarily, but in possibility. He stood, moving toward the window that overlooked the gardens. The question is, what happens when he realizes the possibility he's interested in is you? Eleanor's heart hammered. That's absurd, I'm his employee. You're a woman he looks at like she might actually understand him. Thorn turned, his expression serious now. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, Miss Hartwell. I'm trying to understand whether you've realized what's happening, because Alexander is my friend, and I won't watch him get hurt again. I would never... Eleanor stopped, the words catching in her throat. Would she? Had she already? I believe you. Thorn moved toward the door, then paused. But I think you should ask yourself something. You said you don't get paid unless the marriage occurs. So what happens if the woman he wants to marry is the one who was never on your list in the first place? He left before Eleanor could formulate a response. She sat alone in the drawing room, staring at her notebook full of carefully documented observations about Alexander's preferences, his needs, his defenses, and realized with growing horror that she'd been documenting all the reasons she herself was utterly unsuitable for him. She was common-born, self-employed, utterly dependent on her reputation. Marriage to her would raise eyebrows throughout society. She had no family connections, no dowry, no breeding that would benefit his line. Worse, marriage would mean giving up her work. No man, especially not a duke, would allow his wife to continue operating as a matchmaker. She'd seen it with her mother. Love meant sacrifice, and the sacrifice was always the woman's independence. Eleanor closed her notebook with trembling fingers. This had to stop. She would find Alexander a suitable match, collect her fee, and never think of him again. Even if the thought made her feel like she was suffocating. The next candidate was Lady Victoria Langley, and Eleanor orchestrated their introduction with the precision of a general planning a battle. Lady Victoria was intelligent, poised, genuinely kind. Eleanor had verified this through discreet inquiries, and possessed the kind of quiet confidence that suggested she wouldn't be intimidated by the Duke's title. They met during a house party the Dowager Duchess had arranged, ostensibly to celebrate the beginning of summer, but actually to provide Eleanor with more candidates to present. The drawing room was full of eligible young women, their mothers, and a scattering of gentlemen to balance the numbers. Eleanor watched from the periphery as Alexander made his way through the room, playing the perfect host. And then she watched his expression change when he caught sight of her standing near the window, and the way his path through the crowd shifted almost unconsciously toward her. Stop it, she wanted to say. Look at Lady Victoria. See how she's watching you with genuine interest? Notice how she's ignoring the other titled men in the room. But Alexander reached Eleanor instead, and when he spoke, his voice was pitched low enough that only she could hear. Rescue me, please. Your Grace, this is a party you're hosting. I can hardly... Eleanor. Just her name, but it carried weight. I'm asking. She shouldn't. It would only make things worse. But she found herself nodding, and together they slipped through the terrace doors into the garden beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the air carried the scent of roses and newly cut grass. They walked in silence until they reached a secluded corner near the hedge maze, where a stone bench sat beneath a cascading wisteria. "You're avoiding your guests," Eleanor said, trying for stern and landing somewhere closer to resigned. "I'm avoiding the parade of potential brides my mother keeps throwing at me." He turned to face her. "Though I notice you were watching me in there." "I'm always watching. It's my job." "Is that what we're calling it now?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. "Your job? What else would we call it?" "I don't know. A convenient fiction? A way of pretending we're not—" He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. "We're not what?" Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Lying to ourselves." His hand rose, hovering near her face without quite touching. "Eleanor, I know I shouldn't feel this way about you. I know all the reasons it's impossible, but I can't stop thinking about you. About the way you see through every defense I put up. About how you're the first person in years who's made me want to be seen." Eleanor's resolve was crumbling. "This is exactly why I should leave. Finish my contract early, find you someone appropriate, and I don't want someone appropriate." The words came out rough, almost angry. "I want—" Whatever he'd been about to say was lost as footsteps sounded on the gravel path. They sprang apart, and Eleanor's heart sank as Lady Catherine Ashworth rounded the corner, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Lady Catherine." Alexander's tone was perfectly polite, perfectly distant, the practiced courtesy of a man who'd spent his entire life hiding his true feelings. "We were just discussing the landscaping." Lady Catherine's gaze flicked between them, and Eleanor saw the exact moment calculation entered her eyes. "Of course. I only came to mention that your mother is asking for you, Your Grace. Something about the dinner arrangements." "Thank you." Alexander bowed slightly. "I'll attend to it immediately." He left without looking at Eleanor, and she was left standing with Lady Catherine in the gathering dusk. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "You must be very good at your work, Miss Hartwell," Lady Catherine said finally. "I try to be. And yet here you are, 3 weeks into your tenure, and the Duke remains unmarried. One might wonder if you're genuinely trying to find him a match, or if you have other objectives." The words were delivered with a smile, but the implication was clear. Eleanor's stomach turned cold. "I assure you, Lady Catherine, my only objective is to successfully complete my contract." "How reassuring." Lady Catherine turned to leave, then paused. "A word of advice from one woman to another. Whatever you think might exist between yourself and His Grace, it cannot lead anywhere respectable. He needs a wife from his own world. You must know that." She swept away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the garden, shame and anger, and something that felt dangerously like heartbreak warring in her chest. Lady Catherine was right. This couldn't continue. Eleanor made her decision. Tomorrow morning, she would present Alexander with a final candidate, someone perfect, someone he couldn't possibly reject, and then she would complete her contract and leave. Before anyone else noticed, before her reputation was damaged beyond repair, before she fell any harder for a man she could never have. Except the next morning brought a letter, delivered to Eleanor over breakfast. The wax seal was embossed with an unfamiliar crest, and when she opened it, her hands trembled slightly. "Miss Hartwell, I write to inquire whether you might have availability for a consultation. The Earl of Marksbury has requested my assistance in finding a suitable match for his eldest daughter, Lady Sophia, and I have taken the liberty of recommending your services. The Earl is prepared to offer substantial compensation for a successful match. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Lord Ashford." It was everything Eleanor should want. A prestigious client, significant payment, another success to add to her growing reputation, and more importantly, an excuse to leave Greystone Manor before she did something irrevocable. She should accept immediately. Instead, she found herself staring at the letter, feeling like she was being offered a lifeline and a prison sentence simultaneously. "Bad news." Alexander's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, his hair slightly damp as though he'd just come from washing, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest ache. "Just another potential client," she said, folding the letter carefully. "Will you take it?" She should say yes. Should tell him that she'd fulfilled her obligations here, that clearly no match was going to work, that it was time to accept defeat gracefully. Instead, she heard herself say, "I haven't decided yet." He crossed the room and sat across from her, his movements careful as though approaching a skittish horse. "Eleanor, about last night was a mistake." The words came out sharper than intended. "I was unprofessional. I allowed personal feelings to interfere with my work. It won't happen again. What if I don't want it to be a mistake?" "Your Grace, Alexander." He leaned forward. "Please, just once more. Say my name." "This is impossible." Eleanor's voice cracked. "You know it is. I'm a matchmaker. You're a duke. Even if we both felt something, which I'm not conceding, there's no future in it. You need someone from your world, someone who understands your responsibilities, your position, someone who won't damage your reputation or cause scandal. And what about what I want? What you want doesn't change reality." Eleanor stood, needing distance. "I was hired to find you a suitable wife. That's what I should focus on." "Then you failed." He stood too, and there was something almost reckless in his expression. "Because the only woman I've been able to think about for weeks is the one who was never supposed to be on your list." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Don't say that. Please don't say that." "Why not?" "Because it makes this harder. Because it forces you to admit you feel it too." He moved toward her, stopping only when mere inches separated them. "I see you, Eleanor. The real you beneath the professional facade. You love your work, but you're terrified of what wanting anything else might cost you. You're brilliant at bringing people together, but convinced you can't have that happiness yourself. And you're standing here trying to push me away when we both know—" "Stop." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Please stop. Give me one reason." His hand rose, cupping her face with devastating gentleness. "One real reason why this can't work, and I'll walk away. I'll let you find me some perfectly suitable bride, and I'll marry her and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been braver." Eleanor's breath caught. "Because you'll regret it. Someday you'll wake up and realize you could have had someone appropriate, someone who would have been an asset to your position, and instead you settled for the woman who saw me when no one else did." He smiled, sad and soft. "For the woman who challenged me and refused to accept my defenses. For the woman who makes me want to be chosen, not just obeyed." "Alexander." His name fell from her lips before she could stop it, and the sound seemed to break something between them. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative, it was fierce and desperate and inevitable, as though they'd both been holding back for weeks, and the dam had finally broken. Eleanor gasped against his mouth, and his hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss. For one perfect, terrible moment, she let herself have this. Let herself feel the want she'd been denying, the connection she'd convinced herself was impossible. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and she could feel his heart racing against her chest. Then reality crashed back in. Eleanor jerked away, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, we can't." "Eleanor, I have to go." She backed toward the door, her eyes already stinging with tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She ran. Eleanor spent the rest of the day locked in her room, staring at Lord Ashford's letter and trying to convince herself that leaving was the right choice. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Even if Alexander somehow meant what he'd said about wanting her, even if he was willing to face the social consequences of marrying so far beneath his station, she couldn't do it. Marriage would mean giving up her work, the one thing that had ever been entirely hers. It would mean becoming someone's wife instead of her own person. It would mean dependence, loss of purpose, the slow erosion of the identity she'd built. Her mother had done it, had given up matchmaking for love and been happy, but at what cost? Eleanor had seen the wistfulness in her mother's eyes sometimes when former clients visited to show off their children, the quiet satisfaction of creating successful matches replaced by the more conventional satisfactions of domesticity. Eleanor wanted more than conventional satisfaction, didn't she? By evening, she'd made her decision. She would accept Lord Ashford's offer, write a formal letter to the Dowager Duchess explaining that she'd been unable to fulfill the contract, and leave Greystone Manor first thing in the morning. The letter to the Dowager Duchess was harder to write than expected. In the end, she kept it brief. Your Grace, I regret to inform you that I am unable to complete our agreed-upon contract. Despite my best efforts, I have been unable to identify a suitable match for the Duke of Greystone. I am returning your initial payment and apologize for any inconvenience. Respectfully, Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She sealed it, left it on the table where it would be found in the morning, and went to bed with tears on her cheeks. She didn't sleep. Eleanor was packed and ready to leave by dawn. The house was quiet, the servants not yet stirring, and she'd almost made it to the front door when a voice stopped her. Running away? She turned to find Alexander standing at the foot of the stairs, dressed but disheveled as though he'd been up all night. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression hollow. I left a letter for your mother, Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I've accepted another position. I'm sorry for everything. You're sorry. He descended the stairs slowly. That's it? That's all you have to say? What else is there? How about the truth? He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the fine tremor in his hands. How about admitting that you're not leaving because of work, but because you're terrified? Of course I'm terrified. The words burst out before she could stop them. You're asking me to give up everything I've built. My independence, my work, my identity, all for a marriage that would make me dependent on you for everything. How am I supposed to do that? I would never ask you to give up your work. Eleanor laughed, but it came out broken. Every husband does. You think I haven't seen it? My mother gave up matchmaking to marry. She was happy, but she gave up who she was for love. And you... Her voice cracked. You're a duke. Your wife would have responsibilities, expectations. She couldn't possibly continue operating as a matchmaker. It would be unseemly, inappropriate, impossible. So that's it? His voice was quiet now, devastating. You won't even try? Won't even give us a chance to figure out how it might work? There's no how it might work, there's only how it definitely wouldn't. Eleanor blinked back tears. I'm sorry, Alexander. I'm so sorry. But I have to go. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. I love you. The words stopped her cold. I know I shouldn't, he continued, his voice raw. I know I've only known you a few weeks, and I know all the reasons it's impossible. But I love you, Eleanor. Not because you're convenient or suitable or appropriate. Because you're you. Because you see me. Because when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I could be chosen for myself, and that would be enough. Eleanor closed her eyes against the tears. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Why not? His footsteps approached, stopping just behind her. If you're going to break my heart anyway, shouldn't it at least be for the right reasons? She turned, and the devastation in his face nearly broke her. The right reasons are that I have to protect myself. My work, my future, my identity, those things matter. They're all I have. No. His hand rose, hovering near her face without quite touching. They're all you're allowing yourself to have. There's a difference. Eleanor pulled away before he could touch her, before she could weaken any further. Goodbye, Alexander. I hope you find someone who deserves you. She walked out into the dawn, leaving her heart behind. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Eleanor to realize she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd returned to London, accepted Lord Ashford's commission, and thrown herself into work with desperate intensity. She met Lady Sophia, a sweet, shy girl of 19 who'd been rejected by 3 suitors already, and began the careful process of understanding what she needed in a partner. But everywhere she looked, she saw Alexander. In the way Lord Marksbury dismissed his daughter's opinions, so different from how Alexander had always listened. In the careful social calculations of potential matches, so different from Alexander's genuine desire for connection. In the empty performative relationships she was meant to facilitate, so different from what she'd felt in those few weeks at Greystone Manor. She'd convinced herself that her work was worth any sacrifice. But as she sat through another tedious interview with a potential suitor for Lady Sophia, she realized something fundamental had shifted. Her work still mattered, but it wasn't enough anymore. She'd thought that keeping her independence meant never depending on anyone. But maybe real independence meant choosing what to prioritize, even when that choice cost something. Maybe it meant being brave enough to reach for happiness, even when it came with risk. Eleanor was reviewing her notes when her mother arrived, unannounced and carrying a basket of fresh bread from the bakery Eleanor loved. She took one look at Eleanor's face and set the basket down with a sigh. Oh, darling. What happened? And Eleanor, who'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, broke. She told her mother everything. The Duke, the contract, the feelings she'd tried so hard to deny. The kiss, the confession, the moment she'd chosen safety over possibility, and walked away from something that might have been extraordinary. Her mother listened without interrupting, and when Eleanor finally fell silent, she reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. You think I gave up who I was when I married your stepfather? Eleanor nodded, throat tight. I didn't, her mother said gently. I chose to prioritize differently. The work had been everything for so long, and I was good at it, but I was also lonely. When I met Richard, I realized I could have both. Not the exact same life I'd had before, but something richer. I still arrange matches sometimes, informally. I still have that gift. I just exercise it differently now. But you stopped taking clients. Because I wanted to. Because I'd proven what I needed to prove to myself, and I was ready for something else. Her mother squeezed her hand. But you're not me, Eleanor. Your path doesn't have to look like mine. Maybe your Duke would support your work. Maybe you could find a way to do both, but you'll never know if you don't give him the chance to show you. What if he's changed his mind? Eleanor whispered. What if I hurt him too badly? Then you apologize and accept the consequences. Her mother smiled. But from what you've told me, he doesn't sound like a man who gives his heart easily. If he offered it to you, I doubt he's taken it back just because you panicked. Eleanor thought about Alexander's face as she'd walked away. The devastation, yes, but also the resignation, as though he'd expected her to leave all along, as though he'd learned long ago not to expect anyone to choose him. What if she'd just confirmed his worst belief about himself? Eleanor stood abruptly. I have to go. Now? Now. She grabbed her cloak. Before I lose my nerve. Before... She stopped. Thank you, Mama. Go get your Duke, her mother said. And Eleanor, don't give up who you are. But maybe let someone stand beside you for a change. The journey to Greystone Manor took 3 days, and with every mile Eleanor's anxiety grew. What if she was too late? What if he'd moved on, accepted one of the countless suitable women his mother had no doubt continued throwing at him? What if he simply didn't want to see her? She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, dusty from travel and terrified. The footman who answered the door looked surprised to see her. Miss Hartwell, we weren't expecting... Should I announce you to Her Grace? Is the Duke in residence? He's in London, miss. Left last week for the season. Eleanor's heart sank. Of course he was in London, where eligible dukes went to find eligible wives. But the Dowager Duchess is here, the footman continued. If you'd like to speak with her? Eleanor almost refused, but she'd come this far. Yes, please. The Dowager Duchess received her in the same drawing room where they'd first met, though this time Her Grace's expression was considerably less welcoming. Miss Hartwell, I must say I'm surprised to see you. Your Grace, I owe you an apology. Eleanor remained standing, too nervous to sit. I failed to complete our contract, and I failed your son. I was unprofessional, and I hurt him. Yes, the Dowager said calmly. You did. The words were like a slap, made worse by being deserved. I'm here to ask, that is, if it's not too late, I'd like to try to make it right. By finding him a suitable wife after all. There was something sharp in the Dowager's tone. A bit late for that, don't you think? No. Eleanor took a breath. By telling him I was wrong, that I was scared and I ran instead of being brave enough to stay, that I... Her voice cracked. That I love him. The Dowager's expression softened slightly. He's been miserable, you know. Putting on a brave face for society, attending all the right events, dancing with all the right young ladies. But Lord Thorne tells me he returns to his rooms every night and sits in the dark, staring at nothing. Guilt twisted in Eleanor's chest. Where in London is he staying? The family townhouse in Mayfair, number 14 Grosvenor Square. The Dowager stood. Miss Hartwell, Eleanor, I hired you because I wanted my son to find love. I didn't expect it to be with you, but I'm wise enough to recognize genuine feeling when I see it. The question is, are you prepared to fight for him? Because society won't make it easy. Neither will his responsibilities. If you're going to do this, you need to be certain. Eleanor met the dowager's eyes. I'm certain, I'm terrified, but I'm certain. Good, the dowager smiled. Then stop wasting time talking to me and go get your duke. London during the season was a whirlwind of activity. Balls, routs, dinner parties, all carefully orchestrated opportunities for eligible young people to make advantageous matches. Eleanor had worked the season before, discreetly introducing clients at strategic events, but she'd never attended as herself. She didn't have invitations, didn't move in these circles, but she knew people who did. Lady Victoria Langley, the kind woman Eleanor had presented to Alexander weeks ago, received her with surprised warmth when Eleanor appeared at her family's London residence. "Miss Hartwell, what brings you to town?" "Desperation," Eleanor admitted, "and the hope that you might help me with something both wildly inappropriate and absolutely necessary." 20 minutes later, Lady Victoria was adjusting the borrowed gown Eleanor wore, her eyes dancing with delight. "I knew there was something between you and the Duke, the way he looked at you during my visit. I've never seen a man more thoroughly besotted while trying to hide it." "I was an idiot," Eleanor said. "I let fear make my decisions." "Well, tonight you'll have a chance to remedy that." Lady Victoria pinned a final curl into place. "The Duchess of Marlborough is hosting a ball. Everyone will be there, including your Duke. I have an invitation, and as my dear friend visiting from the country, so do you." "Victoria, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." She smiled. "Besides, this is the most romantic thing I've been part of in years. Now come on, we have a love story to rescue." The ballroom of Marlborough House was exactly as overwhelming as Eleanor remembered from previous seasons. Hundreds of guests, music from a full orchestra, footmen circulating with champagne and delicacies. Crystal chandeliers caught the light from thousands of candles, and jewels glittered on every woman present. Eleanor felt wildly out of place in Victoria's borrowed gown, but she forced herself to hold her head high. She found him near the terrace doors. Alexander stood in a circle of gentlemen, looking every inch the Duke in his immaculate evening clothes, but Eleanor had learned to read him, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Eleanor watched his expression cycle through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been hope before settling into careful neutrality. He excused himself from his companions and crossed the room toward her, and every eye in the ballroom seemed to follow his progress. "Miss Hartwell." His voice was perfectly polite, perfectly distant. "I didn't expect to see you here. Your Grace." Eleanor's hands were shaking, so she clasped them behind her back. "Might we speak privately?" "I'm not certain that's appropriate." The words stung, but Eleanor accepted them. She'd earned his caution. "Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." For a long moment she thought he might refuse. Then he gestured toward the terrace, and she preceded him through the doors into the cooler night air. Several other couples were taking advantage of the fresh air, so they walked further into the garden, following a winding path lit by lanterns until they reached a secluded corner. Only then did Alexander turn to face her. "Why are you here, Eleanor?" "To apologize, to explain, to—" She took a breath. "To tell you that I was wrong." "About everything." The word came out in a rush. "I was so convinced that loving you meant giving up who I was that I couldn't see any other possibility. I was so terrified of becoming dependent that I ran from the one person who might have actually supported my independence. I hurt you, and I'm sorry, and I understand if you can't forgive me, but I needed you to know—" "Eleanor." He held up a hand, stopping her rambling. "Slow down." She forced herself to breathe. "I love you. That's what I came here to say. I love you, and I was a coward, and I've spent 3 weeks realizing that work without you isn't enough anymore, that I want more than just professional satisfaction, that maybe I could have both, if you'd be willing to—" "To what?" His voice was careful, giving nothing away. "To forgive you? To try again? To pretend the last 3 weeks didn't happen? To let me try to make this right?" Eleanor's eyes stung with tears. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I walked away when you offered me everything, but I'm here now asking you to believe that I've changed, that I'm ready to be brave enough to want this. Alexander stood very still, his face unreadable in the lamplight. You hurt me. I know. You made me believe that maybe I could have something real and then you left. I know. Tears spilled over, and Eleanor didn't try to stop them. I'm so sorry. And now you're asking me to risk that again, to trust that you won't run the next time you get scared. Eleanor's throat closed. She'd miscalculated, come too late, hurt him too badly to be forgiven. I understand, she whispered. I'm sorry for bothering you, She turned to go. His hand caught her wrist. I didn't say no. Eleanor turned back slowly, afraid to hope. What? I didn't say no, he repeated, and now there was something soft in his expression, something that looked like the man she'd fallen in love with at Greystone Manor. I'm angry, yes, hurt, definitely. But Eleanor... His thumb traced circles on the inside of her wrist. I meant what I said. I love you. That doesn't just stop because you made a mistake. But let me finish. He stepped closer, his free hand rising to cup her face. You were right to be scared. What I was asking, what I'm still asking, it's enormous. Marriage would change your life in ways neither of us can fully predict. But here's what I can promise. I will never ask you to stop being who you are. If you want to continue working, we'll find a way. If you want to train other matchmakers, we'll set up a school. If you want to do something entirely different, we'll figure it out together. Your reputation will survive. He smiled, and it was real this time. Eleanor, I've spent 5 years convinced I could never have genuine connection. You proved me wrong. If society has opinions about my choice of wife, they can keep them to themselves. Are you... Her voice caught. Are you saying you still want to marry me? I'm saying I never stopped wanting to marry you. He leaned his forehead against hers. But only if you're sure. Only if you're choosing this because you want it, not because you think you owe me something. I want it, Eleanor whispered. I want you. I want a future where I can be myself and be yours. I want to try, then try. He kissed her softly. We'll figure out the details together. Your mother will have opinions. My mother already knows you're here. She may have mentioned that if I let you go twice, she'd disown me. He kissed her again. Besides, she likes you better than half the candidates she presented over the years. Eleanor laughed, giddy with relief and love and possibility. What do we do now? Now? Alexander straightened, his expression shifting into something both tender and determined. Now we go back inside, and I make sure everyone knows exactly where we stand. Alexander. Trust me? And Eleanor, who'd spent so long protecting herself, who'd run rather than risk vulnerability, found she could answer honestly. Yes, I trust you. They walked back into the ballroom hand in hand, and the effect was immediate. Conversations stuttered and died. Heads turned. Whispers began. Alexander led Eleanor directly to the center of the room, to the space where couples danced and turned to face her. The orchestra had fallen silent, every musician watching. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. I apologize for the interruption, but I have an announcement to make. Eleanor's heart hammered. What are you doing? Being brave enough to choose you publicly, he murmured, then raised his voice. 3 weeks ago, my mother hired Miss Eleanor Hartwell to find me a suitable wife. She presented me with numerous excellent candidates, all of whom would have made perfectly appropriate duchesses. The crowd was riveted now, and Eleanor could see Lady Catherine standing near the refreshment table, her expression carefully blank. But Miss Hartwell failed in her assignment, Alexander continued, and Eleanor heard the murmurs beginning. Because the woman I want to marry was never on her list. Could never have been on her list, because she was standing right beside me the entire time. He turned to Eleanor, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. Eleanor Hartwell sees people, he said, speaking to the room, but looking only at her. She understands what makes them happy, what they need, what they're hiding from themselves. She saw me, not the title, not the position, just me, and she refused to accept my defenses. She challenged me, frustrated me, and made me believe that maybe being chosen for myself was possible. Alexander, Eleanor whispered, tears streaming freely now. I know marrying me comes with complications, he said softly, then raised his voice again. Miss Hartwell has built a reputation as the finest matchmaker in England. She's helped dozens of couples find happiness. And I want to make it very clear to everyone in this room that if she agrees to become my wife, she will continue her work in whatever capacity she chooses. My Duchess will not be a woman who gives up her identity for her title. She'll be a woman who makes both stronger. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Alexander dropped to one knee. Eleanor Hartwell, I'm asking you in front of all these witnesses, will you marry me? Will you let me stand beside you while you continue doing what you love? Will you take a chance on us figuring out how to make this work together? Eleanor looked at him, this man who'd been so hurt, so closed off, now kneeling in a ballroom full of the Tun's most influential members, offering her everything while asking her to sacrifice nothing. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I'll marry you. The ballroom erupted. Some of it was scandalized whispers, a duke marrying a common matchmaker, how extraordinary, how inappropriate. But more of it was applause, genuine and warm, and Eleanor saw several ladies dabbing at their eyes. Alexander stood, pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of everyone. It was briefer than the kiss in the garden, more appropriate for public viewing, but it carried the weight of promise. When they broke apart, the Duchess of Marlborough was approaching, her expression amused. Well, Your Grace, you've certainly made my ball memorable. I don't think anyone will forget this season. That was rather the point, Your Grace, Alexander said, not releasing Eleanor's hand. The Duchess turned to Eleanor. And you, Miss Hartwell, I hope you plan to continue your work. I have a niece who could use your services. I would be honored, Your Grace, Eleanor said, and meant it. The crowd began to close in, well-wishers, gossips, people eager to be part of the scandal. But Alexander kept Eleanor's hand firmly in his, and together they weathered the attention. Lord Thorne appeared at Alexander's elbow, grinning broadly. I always knew you had good taste, but this is exceptional. Well done. Thank you for not saying I told you so, Alexander said dryly. Oh, I absolutely told you so. Multiple times. Thorne bowed to Eleanor. Miss Hartwell, or should I say future Duchess, welcome to the madness. Lady Victoria pushed through the crowd, her eyes shining. That was the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed. Eleanor, you have to tell me everything later. I promise, Eleanor said, squeezing her hand gratefully. Even Lady Catherine approached, though her smile was strained. Congratulations, Your Grace, Miss Hartwell. I hope you'll both be very happy. There was no malice in it, just resignation, and Eleanor found she could respond with genuine warmth. Thank you, Lady Catherine. As the evening wore on and the initial shock faded into excited conversation, Eleanor found herself swept into the social whirlwind she'd always observed from the outside. But this time, Alexander stayed at her side, his hand at the small of her back, his presence a steady anchor. Overwhelmed? He murmured during a brief lull. Terrified, she admitted, but in a good way. We can leave whenever you want. Eleanor looked around the ballroom, at the curious faces, the calculating expressions, the genuine joy on some and skepticism on others. This was her future now, not just work she could set aside at the end of the day, but a permanent place in this world. Not yet, she said. Let them get used to the idea. We have time. Alexander smiled and pressed a kiss to her temple. We have all the time in the world. They left the ball an hour later, climbing into Alexander's carriage for the short ride to the townhouse. Eleanor sat beside him, her head on his shoulder, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. That really just happened, she said. Are you having regrets already? No. She lifted her head to look at him. But we should probably discuss the practical aspects. Your mother will have expectations about the wedding. Society will have opinions about everything I do. And I need to understand what being your Duchess will actually mean for my work. Then let's discuss it. He shifted to face her more fully. The wedding. We can have whatever kind of ceremony you want. Large and formal if that matters to you, or small and private if it doesn't. My mother will have opinions, but ultimately it's our choice. I think your mother deserves some say, Eleanor said. She did hire me to find you a wife. She'll want to celebrate that I succeeded, even if the result wasn't what she expected. Alexander laughed. Fair enough. As for your work, I meant what I said. If you want to continue taking clients, we'll arrange for you to have an office in the townhouse. If you'd rather train others, we can establish a formal academy. If you want to do something entirely different, that's fine too. The point is, it's your choice. And if people criticize you for having a wife who works, then they can direct their criticisms to me and I'll ignore them. He took her hand. Eleanor, I'm not naive. I know this won't be easy. People will talk. Some will be unkind. But I'd rather face that with you than spend my life with someone appropriate while wondering what I gave up. Eleanor felt something settle in her chest, the last piece of fear finally releasing. I love you. I know. He smiled. You told me in front of half the ton. I wanted to make sure you heard it. I heard it. He pulled her closer. And I love you. Not despite your independence, but because of it. Because you know who you are and what you want. That's not something I'd ever ask you to give up. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the townhouse, and a footman appeared to open the door. But before they descended, Alexander caught Eleanor's hand. One more thing, he said. I know we're engaged now, but I want you to be certain. If you need time, if you want a long engagement to make sure this is what you really want, I don't need time. Eleanor cut him off with a kiss. I've already wasted 3 weeks being scared. I'm not wasting any more. Then shall we set a date? How about summer, 3 months from now? That gives us time to plan and time for society to adjust to the idea before the wedding itself becomes another scandal. Alexander laughed. Summer it is, though I'm going to spend every day of those 3 months wondering if you'll change your mind. I won't. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I promise. You're stuck with me now. Good, he said. That's exactly where I want to be. Epilogue. 4 months later, on a perfect June afternoon, Eleanor walked down the aisle of the small chapel on the Greystone estate. The guest list had been carefully curated. Family, close friends, and a few influential members of society whose presence would help smooth Eleanor's transition into her new role. Her mother walked beside her, tears streaming down her face, while her stepfather waited in the front pew with a handkerchief already in hand. Lady Victoria sat near the front, beaming. Lord Thorne stood beside Alexander as his best man, grinning like he'd orchestrated the entire thing himself. And Alexander stood at the altar watching her approach with an expression that made Eleanor's heart overflow. Love, yes, but also wonder, as though he still couldn't quite believe she was real. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They'd written their own vows, and when Alexander promised to support her dreams as fiercely as his own, Eleanor's voice shook with emotion as she promised to see him, always, truly, completely, beyond the title and expectations. The Dowager Duchess dabbed at her eyes throughout, and when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, she was the first to applaud. The wedding breakfast was held in the gardens of Greystone Manor, beneath white tents strung with lights and flowers. Eleanor moved through the crowd as the new Duchess of Greystone, accepting congratulations and well-wishes, and found that while some gazes held skepticism, most held genuine warmth. Lady Sophia, the shy young woman Eleanor had been working with before everything changed, approached with her new fiancé, a kind gentleman who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd never known to ask. Miss Hartwell, Your Grace, I mean, Sophia corrected herself, blushing. I wanted to thank you. After you left, your mother took over my case. She introduced me to Lord Wesley, and she glanced at her fiancé. We're very happy. I'm so glad, Eleanor said sincerely. And please call me Eleanor. I'm still the same person, just with a different title now. Will you continue with matchmaking? Sophia asked. Mother said you're establishing some kind of academy. I am. Eleanor smiled. I'll still take a few private clients, but mostly I'll be training others in the method my mother developed, helping more people find the kind of happiness we all deserve. After Sophia moved away, Alexander appeared at Eleanor's side, sliding an arm around her waist. How is the new Duchess handling her first official event? Surprisingly well, Eleanor leaned into him, though I keep expecting someone to point out I don't belong here. You belong wherever you choose to be. He kissed her temple. Besides, half the women here are already asking how to book consultations with you. Apparently a Duchess matchmaker is even more sought after than a common one. Eleanor laughed. Is that what I am now? A Duchess matchmaker? You're whatever you want to be. He turned her to face him. But right now you're my wife, and I'd very much like to dance with you. They moved to the small area that had been cleared for dancing, and as Alexander pulled her close, Eleanor felt the last piece of uncertainty dissolve. This was right. This choice, this man, this future where she could be both herself and his, where she didn't have to choose between identity and love because they'd built something that held space for both. "What are you thinking?" Alexander murmured. "That I was wrong," Eleanor said, "about what matchmaking really means." "Oh? I thought it was about finding compatible people and introducing them, about analyzing preferences and facilitating meetings." She looked up at him. "But it's really about helping people see possibility, about believing that connection is real, even when it seems impossible, about being brave enough to choose love, even when it costs something." "And what did it cost you?" he asked softly. "Fear," Eleanor said. "The belief that wanting more meant losing myself, the conviction that I had to choose between independence and love." She smiled. "Turns out I can have both. I just needed someone willing to build that life with me." "I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice," Alexander promised. "I know." Eleanor reached up to touch his face. "Because you see me, the real me, and you chose her anyway." "Not anyway," he corrected. "Because of her. Because you're extraordinary, Eleanor, with or without a title." They danced as the sun set over Greystone Manor, surrounded by people who loved them, building a future neither could have predicted, but both had chosen. And when the music ended and Eleanor looked around at the life she'd been brave enough to reach for, she felt something she'd never quite experienced before, complete certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Later, as they prepared to leave for their wedding trip to the Lake District, Eleanor's mother pulled her aside. "You look happy," she said simply. "I am." Eleanor hugged her. "Thank you for teaching me this work, and for teaching me that it's okay to want more than just work." "You taught yourself that, darling," her mother smiled. "I just gave you permission to acknowledge it. Now go. Your husband is waiting, and you have a lifetime to figure out how to balance everything you want." Eleanor found Alexander by the carriage, saying goodbye to Lord Thorne and making him promise to visit soon. When he saw her approaching, his whole face lit up, and Eleanor felt her heart squeeze with love. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand. Eleanor took it without hesitation. "Ready." As the carriage rolled away from Greystone Manor, Eleanor looked back one last time at the house where everything had changed, where she'd been hired to find a duke a suitable match, and ended up finding something far more precious, a partner who saw her completely, loved her fiercely, and supported her dreams without asking her to shrink. She'd been hired as the Duke's matchmaker, but she'd fallen for the one she wasn't supposed to, and in doing so had found exactly what she'd been helping others discover all along. Not just compatibility, not just convenience, but true, brave, impossible love that made everything else possible. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story reminded you that being seen for who you truly are is the greatest gift love can offer, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What moment touched your heart the most? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story. Thank you for being here. You're the reason these love stories come to life.